Welcome to the Startup Leader Show, where we learn lessons from leading startup founders and executives. I'm your host, Lisa Dreher, and I'm really excited to introduce our guest for today, Rob Tiffany. He is the Managing Director of Digital Insights and the Executive Director of the Moab Foundation, as well as many other things. Welcome to the show, Rob.
Thanks for having me, Lisa. It's great to be here.
Absolutely. Maybe you can start by just giving us a little background on yourself and everything that you're involved in.
Yes, gosh, the history is long and sad. No, it's great stuff. Been doing IoT for way too long, since the 90s. I used to be a total startup junkie. I'd say, doing the early days of IoT in the 90s, wireless technologies. Did the .com thing like a lot of people, and that blew out like crazy.
Yeah.
You know, probably the last startup I did back, probably in the early 2000s. People familiar with mobile device management. So when we had the beginning of the smartphone revolution taking off, I know people think it didn't start until the iPhone, but literally we had Windows Mobile, and we had Blackberries, and we had some devices from Nokia that were kind of like smartphones, Trios from Palm, in those early days. And so built a device management company, kind of when you think about like in big companies, how they manage devices, push down software and do security updates. So did that, sold that. And this spent most of my career at Microsoft, actually. I'd say the first half was, if you remember, Windows Mobile, a Windows Phone.
Oh
Remember the
yeah.
cool tiles? Did you ever have one of those devices? Maybe.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it was the thing. Things were great before the iPhone. It used to be all about enterprise devices for
Yeah.
whatever reason. Like, for whatever reason, push email was a thing back then. People fought over patents with BlackBerry and other people on who could do push email.
Yep.
Um, if you ever flew in business class back then, everybody had a BlackBerry. And then the iPhone came along, and then Android came along, and then things got weird. And I remember doing lots of executive briefings, and I remember the good old days before the iPhone and Android, and those were great. Plane loads of executives flying into Redmond, Washington to Seattle every week, and I'm doing most of those for mobile. And then as soon as things got weird with other platforms, you had to get thick skin when you're doing those executive briefings. They're like, why would we still be using your stuff? It's like,
Uh-huh.
second half of Microsoft, I spent building Azure, and that was a lot of fun doing the cloud thing. And so, Microsoft it was building stuff in Skunkworks for a while, but it really kind of came out, maybe 2010 timeframe. And so building that, initially using it to help build solutions for mobile devices. But then I found myself in the Azure IoT group and building that. And luckily I'd had experience doing that kind of stuff from a long way back when. And so, yeah, that was a lot of fun. Got recruited by Hitachi from there, because they wanted to get in that space,
Mm-hmm.
to build industrial IoT stuff like that. And along the way, lots of startups. Yeah, I just spent a bunch of time at Ericsson, which is more focused, on 5G. So it's one of the handful of companies that actually makes that technology. And so doing IoT strategy there, which is more narrowly focused, more about connectivity. A really cool thing, this during COVID, you and I've talked about COVID and weird things about the pandemic, but, so I do this thing called the IoT Coffee Talk with a bunch of friends every Wednesday morning. We record it. It's a YouTube thing. We're
Yes, I
YouTubers.
love it. It's so great.
We're total YouTubers. We're not
Yeah.
TikTokers, but at least we're YouTubers, right? And
Right.
so, yeah, so you've got a couple of folks who are industry analysts on there, and like three of us are inventors of a lot of the IoT technology that people use. And yeah, we talk crazy stuff. But when COVID got started hitting us, in 2020, we noticed kids immediately having to go home from school and having to go to their online using Zoom or Teams or whatever, and we started, and my wife's a school teacher. I saw that firsthand. And we just noticed all of a sudden, and I started hearing it, and others like, hey, you got a lot of kids who don't have laptops at home.
Yeah.
And families, underserved areas, under-resourced areas, they didn't have internet connectivity. And so it was preventing these kids from getting education. So we started a foundation called Elevate Our Kids. And I think that's the coolest thing I've been involved in during this whole COVID thing. It's like, because it's been an awful experience for so many of us. But that was shining light. And so we raised money to get, like laptops, Chromebooks are real popular too in schools.
Yeah.
And then we would work with different large companies and stuff like that and others, and raise money and get those laptops to kids, in these different school districts. And it's been great. Worked with T-Mobile on there because they had a program to get internet connectivity to a lot of, so we worked with them in conjunction with the laptops to, get those little hotspot things that do
Sure.
cellular and Wi-Fi. And so that's just been phenomenal. And that's been great. And, ironically, unrelated to COVID, gosh, I just heard on the radio yesterday, there's these fires happening right now in New Mexico, and all the kids have gone home. And I literally heard on the radio how a bunch of these kids don't have internet and they don't have
my
laptops,
gosh. Yeah.
and they're having to go to school from home again, but not for COVID because of these fires. So it's always something, isn't it?
It really is. And it's just I don't think I don't think that everyone realizes, right, that it doesn't take that much to get outside of the range of good mobile connectivity or any
Yeah,
connectivity. I mean, you and I, we both live here in the Northwest, and I don't know, I spend a lot of time out on the water, and there are a lot of places where you cannot get good connectivity.
that's true.
We certainly, I would love to do these from the boat, right?
Yes, that'd be
But
preferable.
it's just the
Yeah.
connectivity, just that throughput isn't good enough to do a live cast like this.
Yes, I'd love to be on a boat on the Hood Canal maybe, and I wish it was real summer here.
Oh
I could go
gosh,
for some heat. Actually, that would be really nice for a change, and
that
sunshine always helps too.
would be so nice. That would be so nice. I'm hoping we get a summer this year.
Yes, I used to
And,
live over there. I used to drive up and down the Hood Canal a lot in my Trident submarine back in
oh,
the
no
old
way.
days. Yes. So
That's pretty cool. That's
that's how I
amazing.
that's how I got to the Pacific Northwest, was literally on a submarine. So who knew? I know it's kind of bizarre.
Oh my gosh. Okay, well, you just brought up a topic we'll have to talk a little bit more about. So
Sure.
we'll get to that. But we actually invited you here today to talk a little bit about your startup experience, but then
Yeah.
also I really want to dig into, because of your experience at Microsoft and Hitachi and Ericsson, these really big companies, right? But
Yeah.
I know you've headed up kind of new initiatives within these organizations.
Right.
So maybe you can kind of talk a little bit about how you've driven those new initiatives within these large companies, kind of that whole idea of entrepreneurship.
Yeah. It's tough stuff. Um,
Yeah.
Sometimes it's harder than being just an entrepreneur doing your own startup.
Hmm.
But like when I got out of the military off of that submarine and there I am in Seattle, I ended up going down the startup path from the get-go. And so that kind of was ingrained in me, and I was a startup junkie. And so then when you're inside large organizations, you still kind of have that mindset.
Hmm.
But of course, not everybody's on board with your mindset sometimes when you're at big organizations. So, a good example is at Hitachi. When I was recruited in there, Hitachi is one of the giant industrial conglomerates out there, kind of like Siemens and GE and ABB and all those guys. And they wanted to get into the industrial IoT game in a
Hmm.
big way. They obviously had the chops for it because they were already doing industrial stuff, but they just didn't know. And so luckily I had done that before. So I was cheating. I knew how to do it. And so my experience there was very startup-ish in that like lots of things in life, I started with PowerPoint and had to go pitch executives both here and in Tokyo on the idea of how to build an industrial IoT platform, and also have to convey my credibility that I wasn't just some random guy saying, "Yeah, here's how you do it." It's like it was more of I've done this,
Right.
and so And so luckily that worked out. And so, it starts with a pitch and then they get approval. And so they funded this whole organization. They called it Hitachi Insight Group. And they pulled in people, and we were actually in Bellevue, but kind of right down the street from the Microsoft campus. I know that's kind of weird because somehow you're on the same street, but you're not in Redmond. And so there we were. And so, the next step after that, every afternoon, we spent every afternoon doing interviews, trying to hire engineers, which was so hard when you're competing with Amazon and Microsoft and others for talent. That
Still
was
difficult, huh?
Yeah, that was tough stuff. But then also, just as we were pulling in engineers and pulling in people, and a lot of talented people, but they didn't necessarily know what IoT was or how that's supposed to work or why.
Mm-hmm.
And so creating pictures is a big thing for me, and how things flow together to make, it's so important to make things understandable to people.
Yes.
I know that sounds kind of obvious. But making it understandable how those things works to the engineers. And I remember them going, "Oh, I get it. Finally, someone told me how the Legos all go together, and this is what it's for. And this is what the outcome is. This is why a customer would even think about buying this."
Right.
I saw this in Microsoft. You'd have a new initiative, a new product, and you'd pull people in from Windows or Exchange Server or SQL Server, and they're all brilliant, smart people, but they don't necessarily know the space they're playing in and the new product or in the world, and so they don't understand. And so I spent, so I was there at Hitachi to do that, and creating the architecture, showing people how that worked. Then the next step after that, literally, we go to these things like Mobile World Congress or IoT Congress over in Barcelona. I literally created the specifications for how to build V1 of this thing called Lumada is the name of the product. It was funny. Marketing had already figured out the name of the product, even though nothing existed. So when I showed up, I thought, I showed up, I thought they already had something. I go, "What is this Lumada thing?" And they go, "It's a name."
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Sometimes it takes a while to figure that out, right?
Yes. Apparently Lumada is supposed to mean something like illuminate the data, something like that. I literally sat on a rooftop bar pool area in Barcelona and wrote the V1 specifications for how to build that product. And then, luckily I was connected online, and I'm telling other people I work with, this is how we're going to piece the Legos together. And you know what? We got a MVP and a V1 out the door, like 9 months later.
Wow, that's amazing. So how do you deal with, a lot of times, look, the big news, right, recently was that Apple finally discontinued the iPod, which, I was like, that thing still exists, really?
I didn't know.
And what's interesting is in that situation, right, the iPhone obviously killed the iPod.
Yeah.
I thought a long time ago.
Right.
So when you're in that situation where you're kind of bringing this new initiative in, a lot of times that new thing is going to completely disrupt the money maker of today. And so how do you deal with that situation? Because a lot of times, there's going to be people within the organization are like, wait, we got to protect the thing that's making us money today. We can't displace all of that revenue with this new thing.
Right. It's such a cliche by now, but the best thing to do is drive to Bend, Oregon, and take those people who are pushing back on you and point to the lone remaining Blockbuster video store in the world.
Yeah.
Literally, if you want to see it, it's in Bend, Oregon. It's still there.
Yeah.
And so I say it's a cliche because in marketing and when you're talking about disruption, people overuse this example, but it's a valid example with Netflix and Blockbuster. In the end, Blockbuster they loved the moneymaker they had of late fees, and they didn't want to let go. And they saw what Netflix was doing, even when Netflix was just mailing DVDs to your house.
Yeah.
And they even had people inside who knew about how to do streaming, but they faced this internal immovable object, this obstacle of there's no way we're going to disrupt our own big moneymaker. And so what happened? They rode that thing right into the ground and until it was just gone. Right.
Yep.
And obviously, the rest is history. Obviously Netflix took off, and now we got all these streaming services, and it seems antiquated to think. And so you have to work with all these your stakeholders. Sometimes when you're disrupting something, it means jobs too.
Yes. Yes.
Um, Anything with technology, and especially this IoT stuff, when sensors and cameras are either augmenting or in some cases replacing a human being who was previously doing that task, you can get pushback. Heck, all the way back in the 90s, the first startup I was at was called Real Time Data. And we were monitoring vending machines with primitive cellular back in those days. We had to build that. That's how I learned all this IoT stuff. And it was so much harder back then.
Oh yeah.
Infinitely harder. You didn't have a cloud. We had to invent every last bit of it, which makes everything today seem relatively easy comparatively. But we were rolling it out to customers to help them, and their employees were sabotaging our technology, and they would rip the stuff out, break the stuff in vending machines, rip antennas off the tops of vending machines, because this happens everywhere. Whenever you have disruptive technology, and I don't want to overstate the term disruptive. It doesn't always even have to be disruptive. It can be, sometimes incremental is all it takes. And so, I see this all the time today. And so it's tough. And so it's always getting on the same page with all your stakeholders. And even sometimes that's not enough though.
Yeah, it can be really tough because they'll also, when you look at the budget every year, right?
Yeah.
The great bulk of the budget will still go to the embedded, the technology that's already existing. It won't go
Right.
to the new development, which is where it probably needs to be more heavily weighted.
Yeah. Like this whole industrial IoT thing, you've got these two opposing forces. These OT people, operational technology, they're in the factory, they're wherever. And then you have IT people over here, and they used to never meet each other ever. And most OT people think that IT is the cause for all their problems. They would say, we never had viruses. We never had any of these problems until you guys showed up. And so with your Windows and Macs and stuff like that, and all your stuff's unreliable and everything like that, and you can't touch our stuff. And yet the whole trend around things like industrial IoT or digital transformation, or we all hear these terms thrown around like Industry 4.0, all these folks have to get together to move forward. Now, ultimately, it's going to come from the top. The executives who are over both sides of that house are going to say, y'all have to get along, and we're going to do this thing. And it might be painful, but you're just going to have to get on board. And yeah, I've seen it firsthand. And so I wish I had a silver bullet answer for you. Empathy, try to put yourself in the shoes, hang out with them, embed yourself with people who are going to be affected to help them understand, I think is the best thing you can do. Don't just be somebody in your ivory tower or throwing things over the wall and saying, yep, this is what's going to happen, because that never works out too well.
Yeah, no kidding. No kidding.
Yeah.
Well, that actually sounds like really good advice. When you think about, those roadblocks that you just kind of run into along the way, whether that be with a new startup or within, the entrepreneurship thing, how have you found are the most, I guess, effective ways of either working around or through those roadblocks that you run into?
Yes. This will also sound like a cliche for all you startup people out there. You need to have a partner. You need to have people who are with you. If you're doing a startup outside, whatever, you always hear like you need a co-founder. You hear that a lot. There's a reason for that. You're going to run into roadblocks. You will run into things that will cause you to lose faith, maybe, in what you're doing. It might seem insurmountable. And the only thing that keeps you going is having this other person next to you to say, no, we got this, or they take on the load. This is real stuff, because I've certainly felt it. I've certainly felt like this is over. We're done. We can't get past this. We should just give up. You have those feelings, when different, it's an emotional thing, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, and so you really have to have people, a partner for sure, especially if you're just a small startup, having that co-founder, because you both have to support each other to keep it going. Because and startups are hard,
Yeah.
and they just are. Most startups fail. And that's also an obvious statistic.
Yeah.
But if you want to have a chance, going it all alone by yourself, I don't recommend it at all. And I've done that before. And yes, it's like, woo, it's like a roller
Sure.
coaster. Um, so the other part of it, is just communication, just always be talking to all your stakeholders, even if it's someone on the other side of the fence who maybe is causing that blocker.
Yeah.
Gosh, thinking about big blockers. So I had this opportunity inside Ericsson to be entrepreneurial. They had an organization inside there called Ericsson One. I'm sure other big companies have something similar, but it was basically, you can imagine the CEO says, hey, we got a lot of smart people here, a lot of smart engineers building 5G and all this other stuff. I'm sure they have some other great ideas. It'd be great to let those ideas blossom,
Right.
somehow. And so had the opportunity within, I being in the IoT space for a while, I was noticing, it's kind of underperforming all of the analysts' expectations and all those crazy predictions that all these companies made that are all way off. And since I've had a front row seat at that mega trend for so long, I kind of had an idea of what the blockers were. And so I actually said, I got to fix this. I couldn't do it though inside my day job organization. I was head of IoT strategy and we're working on this connection management technology. But luckily I had a vehicle inside that company to do it. And so just like I was a startup on the outside, pitch decks, doing research, validating product ideas, but it was basically, how can I fix IoT? What technology could I create that would, what are the biggest blockers to adoption of IoT? It's super complex. It requires so many different skill sets that one person doesn't have.
Right.
Security is kind of a thing. IoT turned out to be the biggest attack surface in the history of computing. So that's kind of no bueno. So how can I work on it? And so, yeah, I was able to come up with those ideas. I had a partner, Courtney Lotta. We went through this together and pitched, raised money internally, and we're allowed to devote our time and build this product, do trials, stuff like that. And so, yeah, lots of roadblocks, lots of naysayers.
Yeah.
And
Sure.
you just keep on fighting. I know that's easier said than done, isn't it?
That's amazing. Okay, so I want to end with one last question, and that is your one prediction about the future of technology or IoT or whatever you want to talk
Sure.
about. So, what's your one prediction?
The one prediction is this whole sustainability thing, this climate thing, you've heard the term ESG within
Yes.
large companies. A lot of people have been giving it lip service for a long time, or what's the virtue signaling is the other term. They want to look like they care, but they don't really care. But now all of a sudden, when I was doing this little internal startup thing, we did trials out on farms in Eastern Washington. And did you notice last summer that it got to like 115 degrees in a place where it never has gotten that hot before? And I watched cherry pie being cooked right on the vine, and berries melting, and apples stop growing, and all those grapes that make that lovely Washington wine stop growing. And it's like, hey, maybe this is a real thing. Also, half the country's on fire every summer. We have fire season now.
Yes.
The drought is a thing. In California, the water is gone. That Colorado River is just trickling. I don't want to. This is not about doom and gloom, but this
You're
leads
totally
to
bringing me down here. So
yes. This
so
leads
talk
to the
about what's the
prediction.
solution here.
This leads to the prediction that companies are going to have to take all this stuff really seriously. It's not going to be just activists or people, screaming bloody murder. You got to do something. Companies are going to have to take this seriously, and you can use IoT and things like digital twins, all these digital technologies. They're not the total solution, but they're part of the solution. What is IoT? It's measuring, it's remotely sensing something.
Right.
I know the air quality is bad in this area because of all the smoke, because of all these fires. I know there's, water issues. You're always measuring. In agriculture, to be sustainable, there's this term like called precision agriculture. I can't just mindlessly irrigate the fields at 4 o'clock every afternoon. I need
Right.
data to tell me exactly how much water to apply and for how long, and then stop, because it's a precious resource. So
Yeah.
anyway, you can use IoT technologies to remotely know in real time the status of all these critical data points that we think about around sustainability. An easy way for me to categorize it has been those United Nations 17 Sustainable Development Goals. Hunger, poverty, climate, water, all these
Yep.
things. It's easy
Yep.
to it's great to help just organize it in your mind. And how do I tackle this stuff? And it's not always going to be some IoT or edge thing or whatever. So you don't want to pound a square peg in a round hole,
Sure.
but there's a lot of places. And so you look at what those bigger problems are, and you come up with the recipes, the plan of action of how you could use this technology to make a difference in that stuff. And so that's how I created the Moab Foundation a while ago. I'm building technology, this IoT technology, to give away to like NGOs, to organizations that are actually trying to make a difference there. Since I've built multiple times these giant IoT systems in the cloud, I know how to
Right.
build little small ones that I can give away for free to people. And then I can give them an instruction manual. Obviously, it takes people in the end and volunteers, kind of like the Peace
Yeah.
Corps or something, right?
Mm-hmm.
But in the end, it still needs people. But it's like, here's technology, here's a recipe, how to go do all this stuff to try to make a difference in some of these categories. And so I've been working heavily on that recently. I'm getting pretty close to having some new news around some IoT and digital twin technology to do that. And along with that, probably by later this summer, I'll have a book that's coming out. I've written a lot of books over the years. This one's called Saving the Earth with the Internet of Things.
Wow. Okay. I can't wait. You guys heard it here first.
That's right.
So
That's right.
awesome. Well, we
Absolutely.
can't wait for that. So we'll have to have you back on when the book is released and you can talk a little bit more about this.
Sounds like a plan.
Great. Thanks so much for making time to be here today, Rob. We really appreciate it. It was just a great session. So thank you.
Thanks so much for having me. This has been great, Lisa.
Absolutely. We'll hope to have you back again soon.
Sounds good.